there! Today we're going to talk about all the books that I read in the month of August. It was a really good reading month for me. I feel like I finally caught back up to the pace of reading that I typically like to enjoy. I got a lot in that I had been looking forward to for a long time, a couple new releases and some older books, rereads as well. So for me it felt like just the perfect month of reading in terms of scope of what I was reading and just getting to things that I was super interested and excited by. I'll start with Akin by Jean Toomer. This was a book that I've been wanting to read for quite a long time. Jean Toomer was a very influential author during the Harlem Renaissance, specifically for this book, Akin. It was always something that I knew that I wanted to read just for the historical context and knowing that so many authors that I've loved to read have been influenced by his work, including Zora Neale Hurston, Alice Walker, a lot of African-American writers that came after Jean Toomer were influenced by his work. He was a man of mixed race, and for a lot of his life, and it seems like at different periods during his life, he was actually white passing. His novel, Akin, was written after he spent quite a bit of time in Georgia, in this rural area in the Deep South. It's a book that takes a pretty unique form. I was definitely challenged by this, as it is kind of a mix of what they call vignettes, but they're all different sorts of vignettes, as there is poetry within this book. There's parts that read more like a play with really heavy on the dialogue. There are parts that read like a traditional short story or a novel form. So it's really just this blend of mixing of different things stylistically. For me, the most outstanding parts were the poetry sections, actually. The book paints such a good portrait of the South at this time, and there's these characters, most of them are women, and they're all really compelling, even though you only get to see them for a brief moment. So that's Akin by Jean Toomer, something that I've been waiting around quite a while to get to, and I'm super happy to have read. The Story of a New Name by Elena Ferrante. This is translated by Goldstein, and this is a reread for me. This is the second book in the Neapolitan Quartet, where we continue to follow two young Italian girls. Now they are in their adulthood, but early adulthood, and as their lives continue and the relationships constantly changing around them, relationships they have with their family, with their lovers, and of course each other. Their friendship is the central focus of this story, as is the series. And yes, amazing book, one of my favorite authors, and I'm totally loving my reread. This book for me was a lot of, gosh, ugh, Nino, he's so infuriating. You love him one moment and you hate him the next, as do the girls in the novel. So you definitely are feeling all the feelings with them. Recognizing the Stranger on Palestine and Narrative by Isabella Hammad. This is a short piece of nonfiction that is basically a speech that she gave that has been now like put into writing, and she also has like an additional afterword that kind of goes along with that. So very brief, but very insightful. This is about Palestine. This is about anger and rage at others' ignorance and just willingness to try and ignore or refuse to acknowledge the realities that is the genocide in Gaza, the genocide against Palestinian people by Israel. She pays homage to Edward Said, who is a very important Palestinian author and activist and writer on politics in general. It was very good. Definitely a bit more challenging than I was expecting. It was definitely a bit heavy on the academic side of things. She goes back and talks about ancient literature, philosophy, different things like that. So this was something, though, well, very short, I needed to take my time with for sure. And just amazing piece by Isabella Hammad. She's a great speaker. She's a great author. I have enjoyed her book Enter Ghost. Not my favorite overall, but still something that I have found a lot of value in and I definitely look forward to reading more of her work. I'd like to read The Parisian, which I think is pretty beloved as well by her. So just an author that I am fascinated with following and very engaged in what she's doing, the things she's talking about, and of course her books and writings as well. I then got to Racebook by Tochi Onyebuchi. The complete title is Racebook, A Personal History of the Internet, and this is a new release. I believe it will be coming out this month, and it is a kind of a blending of a memoir and essay collection. Tochi Onyebuchi covers a vast variety of topics that are like seemingly disconnected, all the way from, cosplaying and gaming to internet spaces, politics, current events. Onyebuchi's gone to law school, so this person is very well educated in the law, so there's a bit of legal things talked about in here and discussed. German, just the language, which is fascinating. Tochi Onyebuchi is really just an eclectic human being, which is what I learned from this book. I really enjoyed his novel Riot Baby. It's really a novella, it's quite short. I read that quite a few years ago now. But Onyebuchi is like a science fiction fantasy writer, definitely a key person in the genre of Afrofuturism. I just was charmed by Tochi throughout this novel. I loved how nerdy he was. It's clear that he latches on to these little hobbies and interests, and he's just so engaged in them in such an active way, where he's just exploring so much about them and drawing connections to all these other parts of his life. And I thought this was very unique. I haven't read a memoir quite like this, where it really does make a landscape of this author's life, and so much of our lives occur now online in this digital landscape. So I thought this was great, and I definitely think if you like Tochi Onyebuchi, or you're just someone who's interested in memoirs who are tackling maybe something unique stylistically in terms of theme, you would enjoy this book. This book has quite a long title, so I'll read it off my screen here. Enemy Feminisms, TERFs, Policewomen, and Girlbosses Against Liberation by Sophie Lewis. Sophie Lewis is a philosopher and writer that I've been engaging with for a while now through reading her works, listening to interviews, and I was introduced to Sophie Lewis through Sunny's book club. So I appreciate Sunny for putting us on to this amazing author and writer. I first read Full Surrogacy Now last year, and really found that work so engaging. This book is more of a broad picture overview of the feminist movement, but particularly the pitfalls that the movement has fallen into, and specific people and leaders within that movement who are approaching feminism in an exclusionary way. We go from white women in the suffrage movement in the US who are working to gain the right to vote, but they're only working for their own interests. They do not want Black women to vote. So that's like an early example that's mentioned in this book. We have the 1960s, where there began to be this like rise of pornophobes within the feminism movement, women who are against sex work, which is a very relevant issue today as well. Up till present day, we're talking about TERFs. There is rampant transphobia within the feminism movement, and Sophie Lewis's argument is that you can't deny that these aspects and these really like horrible things are not a part of feminism. They are part of the history of the feminist movement, and this is a kind of a moment of recognizing these are women who identify with feminism and some feminist ideas, but they are going about this entirely the wrong way, and have caused a lot of harm to people as well. But you can't deny the fact that this is part of the history. We can't erase these parts of history, which I totally agree with her. We can't just disregard bad things that have happened by washing that away under the guise of, all feminism is good feminism, and it's certainly not. There's quite a bit that I already knew about, but was explained in a much more in-depth way that I really valued with this work. Rage Becomes Her, The Power of Women's Anger by Soraya Chemaly. This I listened to on audiobook, and Rage Becomes Her is a book that is about women's rage. Why are women so angry, and oftentimes why is it so pent up inside? And I mean, really the answer is women have so many things to be angry about. We're living in a world where women are constantly disadvantaged because of their gender, where men are constantly subjecting them to harassment. We're living quite literally in a man's world, designed by men, for men, meant for men to thrive in, and meant to oppress women in many ways, and women are oppressed in many ways. This book made me very angry, but not necessarily in a new way. I think these are realities that oftentimes as young girls we become well aware of when we're very young. There are parts in this book that I wish delved more into that anger and how to harness anger as a power and a strength, and how best to deal with this anger as well. In a way, this book to me felt very similar to Invisible Women, which I'm not remembering the author. I read this I think a couple years ago, which talks a lot about data collection and this whole idea of the world being designed by men for men, which is the reality. There were lots of little tidbits of information in Rage Becomes Her that I found very similar, or just kind of added to the knowledge that I learned from Invisible Women, but I much preferred Rage Becomes Her. I think this is a very good piece of nonfiction that does really highlight all the things women have to be angry about in this world. Health and Safety, a Breakdown by Emily Witt. This is a nonfiction book that came out last year, got some hype around it, and to me sounded very fascinating. It was promised as an insight into New York City club techno culture, drug-fueled nights, partying, etc. And for me, I think this kind of solidifies the fact that although that sounds very interesting to me, in practice, in reading these works, I do not find that topic very interesting. She actually mentions pretty early on Tao Lin in his book Trip, which is something I read quite a long time ago, maybe 4 years ago now, and I really didn't care for it. And I realized I should have thought about that before reading this book, because I'm just not that interested in reading about people's drug trips. Like, I don't really care. It's almost that feeling to me of when you're the only sober one in the room, and you know everyone else is having these profound experiences and everything, and you're like, really? I don't know. This book felt a bit like that. You know, we're very heavily focused on drug use and partying, but the other part of this book that I was totally unaware of, and maybe should have been more accurately described in the descriptors of this book, is the relationship that's so central to what's going on here, and that's the relationship Emily has with her boyfriend. Yeah, the relationship goes really bad, and I didn't quite understand why these two people were together in the first place. Seemingly, you know, they both like doing drugs, they both like partying, but at the same time we hear a lot about how they like to do their drugs in different ways. Oh, he wanted to take this at this time, but I wanted to take this drug instead, and he wanted to be riding a high on both of these things, and I wasn't with that, and I wanted to leave at the parties around this time, and he always wants to stay. And so it was just seemed like, well, why are these people together? And that question just persisted in my mind the more we went on and on. Now, while I don't doubt that these are the true experiences of Emily's and all the things that went down between them did occur, this felt a little bit nasty in a way of me wondering what his take was. And I'm only left feeling that way because throughout this book, there was very little of Emily taking any accountability for herself. And that always makes me a bit skeptical, with relationships and the way they're described. This book felt like it was withholding a little bit, and that's not something that I enjoyed, aside from the fact that I just don't think I care to read about people being constantly high all the time either. Memorial Days by Geraldine Brooks. I'll just mention briefly, as I talked about it in another video of mine that I'll link here. This is a memoir about Brooks's loss of her husband, Tony Horowitz, who was also an author. He passed very suddenly. This is her memoir of the immediate aftermath of that, from the moment she gets a phone call telling her that her husband Tony has passed away, and also a timeline a few years later where she goes to write this book, Memorial Days. She's reflecting on the time that has passed and their relationship together. They had a very close relationship, both as authors and each other's editors. Their first person they turn to read their work and offer input. To romantic partners, they had a very long marriage that, from the way Geraldine described it, seemed incredibly loving. And then as parents, they had children together, and the children are discussed within this book. The tragedy that it is that, she lost her husband and her sons have lost their father. So it was very moving. And it really made me want to read Horse by Geraldine Brooks, as that was the book she was writing when Tony passed away. It was a book she felt not confident in, that Tony was constantly encouraging her in. But Horse is out now, and it's been very well received, and it makes me curious to read this book that she was working on at this very crucial, specific time in her life, that turned into, one of the most tragic moments that one could experience, and also just knowing the fact that this was something Tony felt so strongly about and believed in and really pushed her and encouraged her in, even though she was doubting herself. So I'd like to read Horse by Geraldine Brooks soon. Live Fast by Brigitte Giraud is another book about the loss of a partner. This book was translated by Cory Stockwell. I'm not really sure where I heard about this book, but Brigitte Giraud is a famous French author, and I do like to read similar books at similar times just to compare them, and this was vastly different than how Geraldine Brooks approached her husband's death, I think. Early on in Giraud's book, I began to feel uncomfortable with her approach. I understand the desire to search for answers. Her husband passed away in a motorcycle accident in the 90s. So she wrote this book quite a long time after he passed. She is recounting all the events that led up to this moment of his passing. To me, it sounded almost avoidant of the realities of he died in a motorcycle crash. He was stopped at a red light, the light turned green, he gunned the gas, and the motorcycle was no longer in his control, and he crashed. And I think that throughout the book, she discusses her husband's love for speed, and I don't think she ever uses the word, but recklessness when it came to driving and riding a motorcycle. So to search for an answer that is beyond that, to me seemed a little bit avoidant of the realities of the situation. There were other things in this book that really rubbed me the wrong way. Going back to the red light thing, she says the only thing worse about, red lights nowadays is the fact that there's so many homeless people and refugees begging for money. And I think that is a terribly insensitive thing to say, and extremely out of touch if you are so bothered by the fact that there are poor people near you. I think you have a problem with yourself, honestly. And that problem is a lack of empathy. The quote relating to that really bothered me and made me dislike this book. So I don't recommend reading this book. I'm not interested in Giraud after this. It was a very off-putting book in some ways. Winter of Artifice by Anaïs Nin. This has been, I think, maybe the third or second book by Anaïs Nin that I've read. This is a short story collection, which she's known for. She's written a lot of short stories, and many of them are erotic short stories. She was actually commissioned to write erotica for a private collector. I think this is like in the 1940s time period. This is another collection of her stories. This is less erotica when compared to things like Delta of Venus, but still is centered on women, their relationships with men. It wasn't particularly memorable to me, like this isn't something that necessarily will stick with me, but I do enjoy my time reading Nin's writing. I think she has this very like sensual, lush way of writing about relationships that I particularly enjoy. The Ice Palace by Tarjei Vesas, translated by Elizabeth Roquin. This is a short little novella that is following Sis and Un, two young girls. Un is new to school. She has moved to this area and is living with her aunt after family tragedy. She's quiet, shy. It's a very close-knit community, so immediately the children latch onto the fact that this girl is new and different in a way, and Sis takes it upon herself to approach Un and befriends her, and it's a very brief moment of friendship. They spend the evening together at Un's aunt's house where Un lives, and they make a special connection. Un shares something with her that she wishes to remain just between the two of them. Their connection is vague. It's not specific exactly, you know, what is said and what is promised, but you can tell that this leaves a very big impact on Sis, being trusted with this promise. Un runs off, and she actually goes missing. She runs to what is described as this ice palace. We're set in Norway, so it is deep winter, there is ice, there's snow. The community is really struck by this, particularly Sis, who was one of the last people to speak with her and had this very precious connection with her that had just been established. So Sis is heavily affected by Un's disappearance. The descriptions of ice and snow and the landscape were so gorgeous within this book. I haven't read a book quite like this. I think the most comparable thing in terms of this beautiful winter landscape would be The Snow Child by Eowyn Ivey. If you like to cozy up and read about these winter landscapes, I think you would absolutely love this little book. I read it during summertime, which is odd. I think I should have read it during winter. I don't know what I was thinking, but I read it, and it was enjoyable. Another book coming out this month is A Year on the Abyss of Genocide by Mahmoud al-Shaer. This is a collection of letters by a Palestinian poet and author who has been trapped in Gaza. This spans from October 2023 until now. Talk about Mahmoud's daily life as he is there with his wife and one of his children. His family is split up, they are displaced. Him, his wife, and daughter are in Gaza, while his son and his mother or grandmother of the child are in Turkey, I believe. They were able to leave Palestine because of his son's health issues that he needed outside care for, but the rest of the family is still there. Their home has been destroyed. His workplace, this beautiful collective for artists and poets, has been also destroyed, and daily life has to do with hunger, fear, and really just desperation at this point. He has tried to leave to reunite the family, but has been unable to. These are stories that people need to read. They need to hear the realities of this crisis. A very heavy read, well worth reading, and super, super tragic in that you see these glimmers of hope or just relief in moments where there are ceasefire talks or the ability to move to a better place to stay for a while, but at the end of the day, this is desperation. There is not a lot of hope for these people to find, and daily life is absolutely brutal, and more people should be aware of those realities. Memoirs of a Beatnik by Diane di Prima. This was promised as a unique memoir of a lady during the Beatnik era, which to me I was like, oh my gosh, well, yeah, absolutely, I would love to learn more about the beatniks, the beats, and I specifically would love to hear it through the eyes of a woman. But this was just not exactly that. She does talk about her publisher pressuring her to ramp up the explicit scenes to make it more profitable or just appealing to a broad audience, and that unfortunately is really all this book is it's just series on series on series of these sexual experiences that di Prima is having with a whole variety of people, men, women, lots of different ages, people from all over the place, and it's not something I'm interested in. I'm not bothered by the content, but that's just not what I was hoping to read. So for me, this was definitely a disappointment, though I would hope that I can find different works of Diane's or other women during this era who can provide more of a description of like the scene, the art, the literature, the music, things like that, rather than just these personal sexcapades, we'll call them. And then the final book I read in August was Cannery Row, which was a reread for me. This is by John Steinbeck, and Cannery Row is great. I think it's underrated. It's very good. This is one of Steinbeck's books that are set in Monterey. We're set on Cannery Row, this small grouping of businesses and homes, and we are following a few main characters. We have Doc, who is a doctor and a researcher, and then Mac and these young men, these kind of Mac and the boys, and they are helping out Doc. They want to earn some money. Doc sends them on a little frog collecting mission. They come back and they proceed to throw a party at Doc's house that turns into an absolute mess, and they really just kind of like tie themselves in a pickle, and they need to make up for it in some way. So we just have a very wholesome cast of characters. I think this is one of Steinbeck's books where you just literally love everybody. They're all funny and sweet and charming, and just like quirky everyday people that are so compelling. And yeah, another great Steinbeck that I love, and again, a wonderful cast of characters within this book. That's it for what I read in August. I'm excited for what I'm getting to in September already, and let me know if you've read any of these and what you thought. Bye bye.